Welcome back to another episode of DNA Live. Scott, how are you doing?
Hey, Jeff, I'm great. Thanks. Good to be with you.
Great to have you. Today, we are going to be looking at ideological social justice and the biblical worldview and how they differ in the answers to the big worldview questions. Is that correct?
That's it.
I really want to dive into that right away, but first I want to welcome our audience. Thank you so much for tuning in again today. Hello, leave a greeting in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you're tuning in for the first time and you want to find out a little bit more about what we're about, you can visit disciplenations.org. We also have a free online biblical worldview training course called Coram Deo. That's available at coramdeo.com. We encourage you to sign up for that. You can study it at your own pace privately. You can do it with a small group. Just this past week, we've had 500 Colombians from a single church sign up to take this course. They're looking for a way to revive their congregation, how to live out a biblical worldview practically, and they decided to use this as a tool to help equip them to do that. So we're very excited to support them in that. We hope it can be used by you as well to the same end. So Scott, let's get into this. Ideological social justice. That's a mouthful. Last year, you wrote an article that was published in World Magazine about the importance of Christians to not have this sacred, secular, only preach the gospel, only do social justice divide, but to embrace, to engage in social justice. Words have consequences. Words carry meaning. We're talking about something different now than the biblical idea of social justice. Could you explain, to get us rolling, what we mean by ideological social justice?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Jeff. The word itself, or the phrase social justice, the meaning of it has changed in the broader culture over the last 10, 15 years. And this is why it's confusing for a lot of Christians, because a lot of Christians feel a sense of commitment to that idea of justice and social justice. They associate it with things that are good and true and important, like care and concern for the poor and being a voice for the voiceless and things like that, things that, of course, all of us stand for. But what's happened is that, that phrase has always been somewhat contested. And there's always been a segment of the population that has used it for kind of this idea that the way that we bring about change is through changing the structures and the institutions and the systems of society. And we try to kind of work towards inequality of outcome type of thing. There's always been kind of a Marxist type of embrace of that idea as well. So it's always been a bit contested, but I would say in the last 10 years that the phrase social justice has really been embraced as the main label, descriptor, or brand for a comprehensive worldview that is not biblical. So when Christians say, hey, I really am committed to social justice, it can be very confusing now, because you've got a whole bunch of people out there in the culture, probably the vast majority, who have a very clear understanding of what they mean by that. That's not at all what you mean. And so it's become, in my view, the brand, the label, the preferred label that its adherents use for a worldview. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay. So where do we experience this in our lives? If you open first page, chapter 1 of Discipling Nations, Darrell Miller's book, foundational for this organization, we're talking about nurses teaching in Africa, and we get this kind of us looking at this worldview that we don't see, this animism worldview, and it's out there. I don't have to deal with that, but everybody everywhere has a worldview. And this is definitely one we're experiencing now. How do we see this in our everyday lives?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of ways that this is showing up now in the broader culture, and that it's intersecting my life, your life, and the life of almost everyone. Not just in the United States, by the way. This is This is now bearing fruit all over the world. And so, you know, I know the DNA audience is a global audience, and I'm sure that some of the things that I'll mention here are things you've experienced. So, yeah, I guess before I get into some of the ways that people are experiencing it, I just want to say, I just think this can't be underscored enough, that what I'm talking about here isn't just a set of ideas. I am talking about this as a comprehensive worldview. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about it as a worldview competitor, in fact, to the biblical worldview. In fact, I view it as the most serious worldview threat that the church faces in our generation. So this is a worldview. Here's how it's showing up in society, how people are interfacing with it. First of all, just language. So you see this kind of ubiquity of the use of the phrases of social justice, a commitment to social justice, along with diversity, equity, inclusion. So many organizations, companies, businesses now. And
going back to the importance of those are good words.
Absolutely.
I hear inclusion and diversity as a Christian.
Yeah, those are. This is one of the things we'll get into, is that the ways that this worldview is being so effective at kind of pushing itself into the culture is that it actually takes biblical words and language and ideas and then kind of empties them out and fills them up with new meaning. And we spend time looking at every one of those words: justice, diversity, equity, even inclusion. What we mean by those things historically isn't what you're going to learn if you go through a course in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it's important to recognize that you know, that along with this shift in worldviews comes a shift in meaning of words. And that makes it very deceptive because, gosh, you know, I'm all for these things, right? But if you don't see how those words have been redefined, you can easily find yourself kind of on the side of very unbiblical ideas being kind of masqueraded in biblical language. So. Okay, so other ways that people run into it, yeah, diversity training. A lot of people working in companies have to go through mandatory diversity training. And often that diversity training really is, it's almost indoctrination into this worldview is what it is. So, and often people don't have any choice. You just have to go through that. Other ways people run into it, of course, we see a lot of this in the media right now, where you've seen just the erosion of a media that's committed to objectivity, facts, truth. Everything is now driven by a narrative, and facts, evidence, things like that are really downplayed. Whatever the instance is or the circumstance is, it's just used, it's kind of like fit into a narrative. So biblically, we would say we need to be people of truth and let the evidence lead us wherever it takes us. This is not that interested in facts, evidence. It wants to put forward particular narratives regardless of facts and evidence. Seeing a lot of that in universities, media. Political correctness, this kind of speech codes. You can't say that. You know, shaming people for using certain words and language, even attacking free speech. This whole attack on free speech is very much a part of this. Of late, cancel culture, this idea that if you say the wrong things or you do, you can, in fact, because it doesn't have any commitment to truth, people can actually go online, tell lies about people, and destroy their reputation. And you do that by getting a bunch of people to gang up on them. And there's no pushback on it. There's no price that people are paying for doing this. It's very despicable. A lot of people's lives have been really upended because of this whole cancel culture thing. That's just again, we're just looking at ways that people are experiencing this in their everyday lives. You see it as well in just this kind of really prevalent now attack on America, attack really not just on America, but the West in general. Christianity, because Christianity has been deeply influential in the West and America. You see this in our systems of education, statues being toppled. So this kind of virulent attack on the West is very much a fruit that we're seeing as well. So I could just keep going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, can I pick up a thread? So in a couple of your examples, you mentioned the word truth. One time you're comparing truth to narrative. That's another word that has been repurposed, right? So you'll hear truth. That's good. I want to be on the side of truth. But this worldview has most of its birth in postmodernism, right? And so truth means something very different. Could you explain a little bit how my truth is
Yeah.
not truth?
Yeah, I didn't want to talk today, but we certainly could about the roots of this worldview. There's basically two big streams that feed into it. It is atheistic. First of all, it doesn't believe in the God of the Bible. Fundamentally, there is no God, so it's atheistic, it's secular. That's first thing to know. Number two, because of that, there is no objective truth. So postmodernism really feeds into this in a significant way. If there is no objective truth, there is no truth, all there is power, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And so if I can gain control of a story or a narrative, because this is how people live and function. We are story-based people. If I can control the story, then I can control the people. So, it's very good at crafting narratives that are very emotionally appealing in order to kind of further the aims or the agenda that people have. It's a power-based thing. Kind of truth be damned. It doesn't really matter what true facts are. So that's what I'm talking about. That we're seeing that it's ubiquitous now.
President of the DNA, first cuss word on DNA Live. I think we're 20 weeks in. That was good. All right. So this is an hour where we like to discuss things on the level of worldview. We're actually discussing a worldview today and compare it to the biblical worldview. And so I'd like to do that with ideological social justice right now, if we could. Expose it, but also hold up the biblical alternative to that, if we could. Could I ask you a couple questions about that?
Yes.
Okay, so how does ideological social justice understand ultimate reality? And how does that differ from the biblical worldview?
Perfect, yeah. So let me start with the biblical worldview. Ultimate reality and the biblical worldview is true. We live in a pluralistic society and people believe different things, but it doesn't mean they're all equally true, right? The biblical worldview is truth. And the biblical worldview view of ultimate reality begins in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God. Okay, so the grounding of reality is God himself, the God of Genesis 1:1. So the reality of God, the nature and the character of God, and of course then God's creation that includes us. So that is how the biblical worldview kind of just at the very basis begins to understand everything. Now, ideological social justice, because it's atheistic and it's postmodern, it rejects God. There is no God. There are people, and these people are we're here, I guess they assume the Darwinian account. We're accidents. We don't have any particular meaning or purpose ultimately. And so for them, ultimate reality kind of boils down to power. Power is really the defining kind of element of this worldview. It's very interested in power and the way that it sees, okay, there is no truth, because there's no God, there's no truth, there's no love. In the biblical worldview, the universe is filled with good, because of God's character, which is good, and love. This worldview has no basis for those things. So there is no love and there is no truth. There's just power. And so they're very fixated on power. It's seen as a very negative thing. It's a very zero sum. It's used only to amass a kind of, in this very selfish way, control and domination over other people. So at its very root, this is a worldview that's concerned about power, who has it, who doesn't, how do you get it, how is it maintained by those who have it. It's a very power-fixated thing. Let me just say one other thing about power, because this is really, really important. Of course, in the biblical account, power exists, right? I mean, we don't deny that. There is power. God himself has all power and authority. But even here on earth, there's different levels of power, right? I have a level of power here in my family that my daughter doesn't have, for example. Or as the president of the DNA, I have a level of power and authority that the employees, Jeff, sorry about that, I mean, it's just a reality in the world, right? So we get that, but the biblical view of power is very different. Ideological social justice sees it in an entirely negative light. and you know, in a fallen world, this is actually true. They're seeing something true here in a fallen world, in the sense that people in a fallen world use power and authority to, as Jesus said in Mark 10, to lord it over other people and to rule and to dominate and to oppress and to use this power for very selfish ends. So ideological social justice definitely sees that reality of the world. But here's the difference. The biblical account of power isn't limited to that. It recognizes that's true, but it also recognizes, and this is so important, that the one with the most power and the most authority. I'm sorry, I just want to go off on this for a quick second. I just read this yesterday to my daughter. I was reading in John, and it was the account of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And I'd never seen this before, Jeff, but the account of Jesus washing the disciples' feet begins with a sentence where, and I wish I had my Bible in front of me right now, but essentially it says, having all power and all authority given to him, Jesus, he picks up a towel and a basin and he washes his disciples' feet. So incredible, this biblical view of power. Yeah, Jesus has power, that's real, but he uses the power to serve the people that are under him. And that's a reality in our world as well. That's a reality that Jesus demonstrated, that his followers tried to demonstrate, that we try to demonstrate as followers of Jesus even to this day.
Yeah, that's
a reality in our world that is completely ignored by this worldview of social justice. They don't see it. It doesn't exist. So it's a kind of a really dark worldview in this respect. If all there is dog eat dog kind of survival of the fittest power struggle, that's not going to take us in very good directions when you don't have any redemptive aspect to power.
And just listening, and incoherence like dings on my radar, right? And that somebody will have power if power is taken from those who have power.
Correct.
So,
yeah.
Right. Okay.
Tim Keller talked about the incoherence of this in his recent article on critical social justice. He called it he called it postmodern social justice, postmodern critical theory. Yeah, he said, so if really all we are in is this dog eat dog kind of, survival of the fittest, and I don't have power, but I'm doing everything I can to overthrow those who do have the power, and then I eventually succeed and I now have power. What's to make me any better than those who had power before? Mm-hmm. The answer is there's nothing.
Yeah.
So, it's a very, how can I say? There's nothing good or redemptive in it, So
right.
You're just going to be the next group that the victims of your power are going to try to overthrow, and it's a cycle basically.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so ultimate reality. In the beginning, God, ideological social justice, no God, power. Got it. We're taking notes.
I want to just, there's so much that could be said because
we're overviewing. We're doing an overview today. Yeah.
When you just boil it all down to power, what do you not have that the biblical worldview has? Because the biblical worldview grounds reality in God. God has power, but God is love. He's also just. He's also merciful. Mm-hmm. Because he's merciful, you have grace, you have mercy. Those are realities at a fundamental level in our universe. If you walk around with the lenses of ideological social justice, there is no mercy, there is no grace, there is no forgiveness. And so think about a world where those things are absent. What kind of world will what kind of society will that be?
Well, and Scott, I've heard you say before that because biblical worldview is reality, anyone living outside of that is like a fish trying to live out of water. And people that are living in other worldviews have to borrow from truth to oxygenate themselves, to keep going. And we're seeing now a lot of people that might be have traditionally distance themselves from Christians in the way they're viewing a lot of things are now saying, wait a second, this cancel culture is not working for us. I mean, where's the forgiveness in it? Why are we burning people's careers down overnight? And so we see this kind of alliance of kind of strange allies in this, right?
Yeah, a good point, Jeff. One of the things that I'm seeing is that see people that are fully on board with this worldview. They really have those lenses fixed on their head tightly, and they feel a sense of purpose or meaning in going out and attacking people that don't have this worldview. They view them as evil oppressors, and so there really is, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but they really do have the sense of purpose and meaning in attacking this evil. They have a morality in this worldview. So they go out and they might join a social media mob and attack somebody, and they get a sense of meaning out of that, like they're doing something good. But then what they find is that if they slip up one time, and they say the wrong thing, then they become the victim of the attack. They become the victim, the target of the cancel. And many of those that were on the side of canceling others, and then they turn around and get canceled. Just like you said, all of a sudden it's kind of a wake-up call to reality, because that's so painful, that's so damaging to them, that they recognize that it's unworkable. And a lot of those people actually have become Christians as a result of this, or they've moved off of that worldview because they've seen then through personal experience that it didn't work. It was really damaging. So
I want to take 1 second, because we did kind of say that this is an overview, and I know you love to dig into everything deeply. So I want to share with the audience, anyone watching this later, that you have a book coming out within weeks now.
September 15th.
Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. And it's a much deeper dive in this. On our website, you can sign up for the newsletter, you can sign up for the updates.
News and updates.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. News and updates.
For when the book's coming out. And Jesse just linked to that right in our comment section. So if you want
September 15th.
Get a hold of that, please let us know. Add your name to that list, and we will send you an email when it's out and available. Okay, let's see if I can find words again. Here we go. So how does ideological social justice understand human nature and human identity?
Great.
And
let me start again
with the worldview. Great. Yeah.
Let me start with the Bible, because I think that's where people are coming from. We understand that the Bible has such a profound, beautiful, incredible view of what it means to be a human being. That's rooted in the Imago Dei. We're made in the image and the likeness of God. And that gives us this unique status in all of creation. It gives us incredible value, incredible dignity, incredible meaning, purpose, even rights, the right to life, the right to liberty, as America's founding fathers put into our Declaration. So the Imago Dei sees people first and foremost as image bearers of God, and as people that have a place, a God-given place or role in this world to steward, to exercise godly dominion, and to take the goodness and the truth and the beauty that God put into the Garden of Eden and spread it everywhere, right? To leave the world better than we've found it. So all of these things. Now, that's not the limit of our identity. We also, there's our identity is found in our groups and communities, particularly our families. If you want to know me, Scott Allen, you have to know something about my parents and my grandparents, where I come from. That shapes who I am. And then, of course, even the ethnicity piece, you have to, I'm kind of, my ancestors have been in this country on my dad's side since the 1600s. So I'm very American. So if you want to know something about, you have to understand something about America. If you want to know something about my friend Chris Ampadu, you got to understand something about the culture of Ghana. So those things do shape us. Now, let's contrast this to, I would say, let me just, one more thing on that. They shape us, they don't define us. What defines us is the fact that we're made in the image of God. That's what defines us. Maybe one other piece that's really important I need to put in here too is that the biblical view of human nature, or what does it mean to be a human being, also has to take into account the fact that we're rebels, that we have been given, because we're God's image bearers, we've been given a degree of freedom, and that freedom includes the freedom to choose or reject God. God built us with that freedom. He knew the risk he was taking. And sadly, human beings from Adam and Eve forward have chosen to use that freedom to reject God. So the source of brokenness and evil in the world comes from that alienation we have from God. So all of us are sinners, in other words. Yeah. That's a part of what it means to be a human being, is to have that stain of original sin, that inclination to do what's wrong, to be lawless, to have my own way, to not, want to live like God exists and just kind of live like I'm the king.
Yeah.
So that's part of what it means to be a human as well. So those are, the view of human nature that comes from the Bible is very rich. It's very powerful. What about ideological social justice? There is no God, so we're not made in his image. It kind of assumes the Darwinian account, we're accidents. So how do we define ourselves? Well, we're defined in this worldview primarily kind of sociologically. We're defined by social forces and kind of the power dynamics that they maintain. So, if I am a male, that's a group. I'm part of this male group. Well, that really defines me over and against a female. If I am white, that really defines me over and against people that are black or brown. So you're defined, essentially, you're defined by your group. Everything is kind of group defined. And in this worldview, individuals really don't count for much. They kind of are really just drones or avatars, mouthpieces, Nancy Pearcey says, for the larger group that you belong to, because that's what defines you. So, for example, one of the phrases that's very prevalent right now is, white privilege. Well, that's presupposing this particular view of human nature, that what defines Jeff, you and I with white skin is this concept of privilege or power that other people don't have. That's what it means to be white. So, this worldview is constantly trying to put you in a box, whether it's a box of gender identity or sex or skin color, and what you personally believe or your own personal history or experiences don't really matter. You're all going to just be defined by what's in that box. So it's a very dehumanizing kind of view. It's a very reductionist and dehumanizing view.
So with biblical worldview, if we're talking about the worth of the individual,
right,
their value, they are made in the image of God. And all those things you just mentioned are still, they're part of their identity, but they're here. And so their worth never changes regardless of what's in that box, regardless of the qualities, immutable or otherwise, that make up this person. Ideological social justice, that box is the standard here. So depending on what's in that box, my worth, my value moves up and down. Is that a good?
That's exactly right. What ideological social justice does, by saying you are a product of entirely your particular group, what it does is it says that there isn't any common denominator between those groups. In other words, there isn't a common human nature that we all kind of share. And that gives us the ability to talk to one another even. I remember many years ago, I saw that video, the YouTube video of that confrontation at Yale between the students and Professor Christakis. Some of you might know what I'm talking about. It was this very alarming video of this very kind of genteel professor being surrounded by this angry group of students. And one of the students, who was black, got right up into his face and he said something along these lines. He said, "You will never understand what it means." How did he say it? You will never understand my reality, essentially, as a black person, because you're white. And that's that view in a nutshell. You will never understand my reality. If that is your worldview, boy, we are headed for some serious social disintegration, because you can't even talk then. Like there's no basis even to have conversations with one another because we just can't even understand each other's realities, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a very dark view of human nature, and it's very dehumanized. You know, the idea of the individual, the importance of the individual, the idea that an individual is unique and can make choices. We talk about this in the DNA all the time, has the ability to make choices, and those choices can impact history. That is a very biblical Judeo-Christian idea that doesn't exist until that idea comes into the culture through the Bible. And in our fallen world, you know, you tend to be defined by group. And the Bible then breaks into that and says, no, those groups do shape you, they're important, but you're not defined. You are an individual with incredible agency, power to make something of your life in this world. That's denied largely by ideological social justice.
Okay. So starting with the biblical worldview, I'm guessing you're going to do this time. Could you explain how it differs with morality, good and evil? How do we understand that with these different lenses?
Yeah, great. So on the biblical side, there is a defined moral system, obviously, and it's rooted in the character of God himself. God is good. He is holy. He is righteous. And so he becomes the standard for what is good, the transcendent objective standard for everybody, for all time, for all cultures. You know, he defines what is good. Of course, his character and that understanding of goodness is then communicated to us as image bearers in a number of ways. It's communicated to us through the stone tablets that were delivered on Mount Sinai to the Jews, and through the Jews, they were delivered to the rest of us. And so we have an understanding of what good and evil is as we look at those kinds of things. These things are good. Worship God. Don't worship idols. That's evil. So we have it through the Ten Commandments. We have it through what Paul says in the New Testament, the law that's written on the heart. So even if you've never been exposed to the Bible or the Ten Commandments, that very morality is rooted inside of you, inside of every single human being, because they're image bearers of God. C.S. Lewis talked a lot about this in his book, Mere Christianity. And he started that book off, I'm sure many of you have read it, by talking about kind of right and wrong as clues to the meaning of the universe, and how, you know, you can go to any culture around the world at any time, and there's this kind of mysterious understanding of what is good and what is not that's shared, and we don't quite know where it comes from. There's certain things that are just kind of wrong no matter where you go, you know. It gets distorted, it's not perfect, but there's largely this sense of right and wrong. And Paul talks about that as our conscience, our kind of this embedded sense of right and wrong that everyone has because we're made in the image of God. So good is defined by God. It's communicated to us where it's our duty to do what is good and right or just, and evil is the opposite of that. Now, let's look at ideological social justice. It too has a defined morality, which is, let me just say it's inconsistent. It really shouldn't. Because it's an atheistic worldview, at the end of the day, there is no transcendent good or bad, right or wrong. It all kind of devolves down to what each person themselves thinks about these things. There isn't any kind of shared view of good or evil. And if you start with power, whatever gets you more power then can become good, right? So, but they're inconsistent on this point, and this is, I think, one of those areas where, Jeff, you were saying they're borrowing because it doesn't work, you know, they have to borrow. And so what they do is they set up a morality, but the morality is very different than a Judeo-Christian morality. The morality basically says this: this part of the worldview borrows from Marxism more than postmodernism. And so basically, Marx set up this binary of oppressed and oppressor, and the oppressor, in his view, it was a class-based view, where that oppressor was associated with capitalism, greed, and that was evil. That's bad. And then on the other side, you had the victim of that oppressor, the worker, the underclass, and they were associated with in a sense, with innocence. Victimization is associated with innocence, and even more with righteousness. Today, that kind of oppressor-oppressed binary is a big part of this worldview. It doesn't see it merely in the Marx's original conception of class, kind of economic view, but it sees it now in terms of race, sex, and gender identity. And so, for example, if the people with power in those binaries, whites have more power than people of colors. So whites kind of are, you know, they've got greater evil, moral guilt than people who are oppressed by whites. Same with men and women. Women have less power, men have more. So it's, everything is, basically evil is power. If you have power in this system, you're evil. And if you don't, then you're essentially innocent. And
does that carry into the actions and decisions of that group? Because I'm in the oppressed group, the actions that the things that I do are good versus...
Absolutely, yeah. The whole moral imperative in this worldview is to fight for the oppressed and to fight against the oppressor. And that is what gives meaning and purpose to people in this worldview. That's one of the most powerful dynamics of this worldview, because a lot of the people who are attracted to this worldview, they don't know the Bible, they don't know Christianity, they were raised in a very secular context where they really didn't have a worldview. And let me just tell you right now, you can't live without a worldview. You know, if it's just your life is meaningless and there's no meaning in this universe, that doesn't get you very far. People can't live with that. So they didn't have access to the biblical worldview, didn't go to church, didn't know the Bible, didn't even know what Christianity teaches. So they're kind of looking for something to give meaning and purpose to their life. And then here comes this ideology, and it says, here's how you get meaning and purpose. Fight against oppression, meaning fight against these powerful groups that are oppressing these innocent groups. And this has just really been attractive to a lot of people in this kind of emerging generation. Gives them meaning, gives them a sense of purpose.
So we're kind of combined. I mean, we've done alternate reality, we've done human identity, we've talked about morality,
right.
and they all go together into this comprehensive understanding of it. Because again, if I'm a Christian and I'm standing next to a marginalized, oppressed person, then in my faith, I would want to help them overcome oppression. But as we combine these layers that we're talking through, the definition, who's assigned as oppressor, who's assigned as oppressed, is misconstrued.
Yeah, it's seen in a very different way.
Yeah.
So the Bible also, don't get me wrong, the biblical worldview is very concerned about oppression.
Right.
But let me just give you an example of how that is, the view of oppression differs depending on the worldview. So like, for example, today I would look out into the world and I would say, where's the oppression? And I would go and I would look around and I would say, wow, look at these concentration camps in China and these Uyghurs that are being kind of enslaved and even tortured and killed for their body parts. That's oppression. Ideological social justice wouldn't disagree with that necessarily, but it would broaden this understanding of oppression out so much that it's not just people like the Uyghurs who are being, enslaved and tortured. Now it's anybody with some skin color that isn't white, or any female. They are by nature oppressed. And so it broadens that out so broadly that it's actually really dangerous in my view, because what it does, by broadening out this understanding of oppressed and oppressor to fit this worldview kind of understanding of this particular binary that they've set up, it actually makes it blinds people, or it clouds them from seeing actual oppression. They have a hard time seeing the actual really oppressive things that Christians should be concerned about and fighting about. because they're spending so much time, looking at these things that actually aren't oppressive,
Yeah.
There was
I was gonna ask something like, because we as
Yeah.
Christians, we don't want to overcorrect as we're
No,
pushing,
we don't want to say, oh no, oppression's not real and God isn't concerned about it. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so morality, biblical worldview, rooted in God, His design, natural law, revealed in Scripture, our hearts and consciences, ideological social justice, oppressed oppressor paradigm.
Right, and a way of defining that based on class, skin color, sex, and gender identity.
Okay, so again, as these it's fun to see these stack, because the next one I want to ask you about is how we overcome evil in these two different worldviews. And so since we've gone this far down the path, I'm asking you this already knowing that evil's misdefined in this worldview, but nonetheless, how is evil overcome?
Yeah. In the biblical worldview, evil is a consequence of the fall. And so, because all of us are complicit in that, the Bible's very clear. All, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So evil exists in every person, biblically. We all have the capacity for evil. And we actually know that, we if we're really honest with ourselves, we know we don't do things that are right, and we hurt people and are selfish, right? We know that that's an inclination that we all have. I certainly do. We all get that, and the Bible is very clear. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, this famous Russian dissident during the Cold War, said the line between good and evil, it doesn't actually pass through political parties or ethnicities or classes. It passes through every single human heart. And he meant that even, he was a guy that was held in prison camps in communist Russia. And he recognized that if he were in power, he'd probably be oppressing people too, that he had the capacity to do that. So that's the biblical view. And then the biblical view of how do you overcome evil is the gospel. The only way that root of evil in our hearts can be overcome is that, number one, God is just. And so every act of evil, every act of every broken law on our part has to be paid for, and Christ pays the price on the cross in order to forgive us, so he can forgive us, wipe our record clean. But then he doesn't just do that, he actually gives us a new heart, right? There's this whole aspect of regeneration, that I'm going to put my spirit in you, I'm going to give you a new heart that's going to be inclined to do what's good and right. And that's how, so the biblical view of how evil is overcome in this world, it's through this inside-out process of transformation that starts in the heart and then in the mind through the power of God, through the gospel and regeneration. And then, of course, it works its way out into society, right? It has ripple effects, or it bears fruit in our families and in our cities and our social settings.
And as far as the evil that we're rooting out, again, this is one of my preemptive don't overcorrect warnings, right? That as sin and evil can also work its way out from the individual into institutions, into systems.
Absolutely.
We don't reject that. Right.
I don't reject that. In fact, that's one place we can have common ground with people that hold to this worldview, because what they are focused on, and let's just back up. Let's talk about their view of evil.
Okay.
And how you overcome it. First of all, evil isn't sourced in the heart. They don't have a view of the fallenness of man. They don't have this doctrine of original sin. They don't see people essentially as fallen. That's not their worldview. So evil doesn't come from hearts, it comes from society, and it comes from social structures, and social structures that lead to inequalities. And so if we can kind of jigger these social systems and structures to eliminate these inequalities of outcome, then we're going to be able to overcome this problem of evil. So it's always kind of, this is where you get the folks that really believe in this or subscribe to this are always talking about systems, systemic structures, institutions, because for them, though, that is the problem. You have to fix these systems and structures. Now, how do we view that as Christians? Well, yeah, we can find some common ground, as you were saying, Jeff, because our systems and structures, whether it's families, governments, organizations, laws, policies, they can very well be evil. Because, we as image bearers of God are fallen, but we're also people who create. We create culture. We create structures and systems and families. And that evil then flows over into the things that we create. So
I would say, despite being image bearers of God, we're fallen.
That's right.
Right.
Those two things those are not mutually exclusive ideas.
Right.
We're image bearers of God who are fallen.
Right.
The biblical story, the biblical narrative is how you overcome that fall and get us back to who we actually are, to this what it really truly means to be human in all that God originally intended, apart from the fallen nature. So so we can agree with them that the systems and the structures are broken and they need to be fixed. But where we have to really firmly disagree with them is that the way you fix broken systems and structures isn't by toppling them, isn't by setting up new systems and structures, right? Kind of overthrowing this particular law or this particular structure and then setting up something new. You're not going deep enough. The reason that those structures are broken is because we're broken. And they have no answer for that. There's no kind of, you need to repent, you need to deal with the evil in your own heart. That's foreign to their worldview. It's all systems and structures. So we can find common ground, but the way that we bring about change is completely different. Theirs is futile. If you change this system, this government, this whatever, the next one's going to be just as bad because we're fallen people. The only way you're going to get good is by changing people themselves. And that's what the Bible recognizes. And that's what Jesus sets out to do through the cross. So.
Man. All right. So let's see. How do we know what is true based on these two different, or within these two different worldviews?
Yeah, this question of truth, or the theological word is epistemology, isn't it? Yeah. How do we know truth, right? Yeah. So biblically, it's a very rich answer in terms of truth. There is truth. Objectively, God exists. And so first of all, we can know truth. That's a possibility. And we know truth in the Bible through revelation. God reveals truth to us, and he does that in a number of ways. He does that through his creation. It says in Romans chapter 1 that the creation itself is powerful evidence of God. So powerful that there really doesn't need to be any more evidence. It's evident to every single human being, regardless of whether they have Bibles or not, that they know God exists just because of the evidence of creation. So creation, there's the law that's written on the heart. That's part of the evidence of truth. We know that there's moral truth because it's actually embedded in us. The Bible itself, God's revelation through his word that was spoken and written down, divinely inspired, and then passed out around the world so that we can know the truth. And then, God makes us with certain capacities. We have the capacity for reason, and we are kind of logic that's built into us, and so that's good. God loves those things. He wants us to use those capacities for reason and logic to seek out what's true, to seek and to push into how do we know what's true. So Christians are very supportive, for example, of science, because science is essentially pushing hard through facts, science, and reason into creation to understand truth. So the biblical worldview supports science, modern science. Okay. Ideological social justice. Let's look at how it understands truth. First of all, it's atheistic, as I've said. And so there is no objective external truth. Okay. It doesn't exist. There's your truth, there's my truth, or more specifically in the case of this worldview, your group's truth and my group's truth, right? Truth is kind of defined to the group. It's relative to the group. So there isn't any kind of objective meta-narrative. This is the postmodern aspect to it. There isn't any truth that's out there. So in fact, they would say any kind of claim to know truth is just a holdover. It's a tool that's used by oppressors to gain power. So if I said, hey, we need to seek the truth out on this because there is truth, that whole idea they would just completely dismiss and say, yeah, those notions come from Christianity and from the West, and that's oppressive. That's just a tool. It's this kind of subversive tool that's used by powerful people to gain what they would call hegemony or power over other people. So they deny all of that. Now, do they have an understanding of truth? Yes. In their worldview, truth is defined by the victims of oppression. In other words, they are the ones that have the right and the authority because, again, of their moral system, which gives greater value to oppressed people. They have greater value, they have greater moral authority, and they have greater access to truth. So you see this, for example, in just kind of belief, remember Justice Kavanaugh hearing, that thing came around, and they accused him of rape without really any evidence. But the claim was, believe the victim, right? Believe the victim. That's the epistemology of this particular worldview, that the victim, regardless of facts evidence, has a claim on truth that actually has to be believed and supported. So in this worldview, victims, there's a lot behind this in this particular worldview. It's called standpoint epistemology, and it's basically, if you're a victim, you have greater insight into reality because you experience oppression in a way that an oppressor never does. So an oppressor never experiences oppression. They don't see it. They don't know it. Whereas you do. You know it, you've experienced, you see it, you have greater knowledge, greater insight into the truth. So, I've seen this personally, Jeff, just in terms of my interaction with people that have this worldview. In a biblical worldview, when you're in a dialogue with somebody, perhaps in this particular example I'm thinking of, I was talking with Darrow, and Darrow's a guy that's been around for a while. He's old. Sorry, Darrow. But
we'll call it like we see it, Darrow.
In our worldview, age comes with, wisdom, and that should kind of come with a level of respect. Like, this guy's been around, he knows things, he's experienced things I haven't. But in this new worldview, the age thing doesn't matter at all. It's purely oppressed oppressor. And in this case, we were talking to somebody that didn't have white skin, and they were much younger. They were in their 30s. But they came in and they said, I'm going to set you straight. Let me tell you the way things are. And it wasn't a discussion like, here, let me share with you what I think I'm seeing, and let me tell you some of the things I've learned, some of my experiences. It wasn't that kind of dynamic at all. It was, you sit down, let me tell you the way things are, you listen. And I've never experienced that until just a few years ago, but I've been experiencing that because people are being shaped, I don't think often very consciously, but they've absorbed these ideas kind of unconsciously, and they're being shaped by this kind of epistemology that I, as a person of color, a woman, sexual minority, I have this experience of oppression that you don't. You just need to listen to me. I'll tell you the way things are. So,
and again, a preemptive overcorrection warning would be, we're not saying
don't listen.
We're saying right. Let's invite them into a system that uses logic and facts and evidence to discern an objective, the reality, the real truth.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks for doing that. I really appreciate you saying don't overcorrect. Yeah, because that's always a temptation when we see these errors, is to overcorrect. And one way you would overcorrect is to just say, I don't really care what your experience is,
Right.
I don't care what your experience is as a Black or brown person. That's exactly the wrong thing. We do need to listen and learn from each other. I mean, that's part of how we learn the truth. But this idea that, you have certain kind of knowledge or insight that other people don't based on skin color or sex, that's not true. So necessarily so.
Okay, so how do we argue for objective reason then? I mean, we're coming from completely different presuppositions. How would,
Right.
that kind of, in my little disclaimer I just said, invite them into, but I mean, we're not starting on any common ground with regards to this.
That's right.
How do we invite them into it?
Yeah, one of the things I think all of us are kind of realizing is that, the tools that we would use to discern truth, even with people we disagree with, in terms of let's have dialogue, let's have debate, let's have discussion, they don't really work with people that are really tightly, shaped by this worldview, because we just don't have that kind of common ground that would say we can, we don't have a common ground that says there's something out there that we can learn, and then once we learn it, we can kind of all get, agree to that and get around that. They're seeing everything in terms of power. And so those kinds of tactics like debates, discussion, dialogue are really, in their view, just power tactics. So they don't work well. They don't work really at all. And that can be really disheartening, because then it's like, well, what do I do? How do I engage with these people?
Yeah.
And there are other ways. We can talk about that. I think, there is this level of spiritual blindness like there is with any false worldview here. And so prayer is really important, that you would pray that people that are kind of really deeply shaped by this idea would have those blinders removed so that they can see things that they can't see now. So prayer is really important. And I think just honestly, the power of love is really important here too. Just loving people kind of regardless, in a sacrificial way. There's something that's so powerful about that, especially if they've been wounded or hurt in some way. Again, I come back to some of these people who themselves have run up against the buzzsaw of this worldview, and it's come back and bit them or really hurt them. Reaching out to love them and to embrace them can really begin to shift worldviews here. But just engaging in that discussion and dialogue, often they don't want to do it. It's not, that particular tactic is not that helpful, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, well, and the thing about narrative, the power of story, is that people that are living within a worldview didn't go shopping down a store aisle to pick one out. I mean, they're in it, and so
you catch it. Worldviews are caught more than they're taught, right?
So, yeah, they might be in it unaware that there's an alternative out there, right? The blinders are on. They are.
Arturo
Kuba, our guest, our friend, says that worldviews blind you.
They blind you. Yeah. They have this worldview unaware of how they've picked it up little by little, drip, 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 over many years within a culture.
Or even aware that they have it. I mean, it's the lenses you look through.
And they don't have any perspective on it. Like they've never learned the biblical worldview, so they can't kind of have a perspective on it to go, oh, it's different than this.
Yeah. And
so it is, for them, it is reality. This is just the world. This is real. And this is reality for huge numbers of people in the West today. And they've really embraced this. And we can talk about why it's really been spreading, and it's in so many ways become very dominant. But one of those ways is because it gives, for people that grew up without any sense of meaning or purpose, just this Darwinian, materialistic blob with no purpose, all of a sudden now you have purpose. You can fight for the good. And people are just going to gravitate like that, to like a moth to a flame, because we need that. Yeah. You can't live without it.
Right.
And this worldview gives them that. So.
Okay. So, Scott, an hour is never enough time. We're right at the end here. I'm going to ask the grace of the audience here to let us go over a few minutes, because once more, I want to highlight the book that you have coming out. If you want to say something about that in 30 seconds, there is a link already in the comments. If you go to disciplenations.org, there's a bar that pops up on the top. It's the first thing you'll see to also sign up for that update list if you'd like. So go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I wrote this book mainly because I was very concerned as I began to be more knowledgeable and aware of just the shape of this particular worldview and how it was affecting the culture. I began to see it, of course, as a very dangerous worldview. It's going to rip the social fabric apart. It cannot sustain a healthy society at all. It's very dangerous in that respect. But my greater concern was that it was coming rapidly into the church, including the Bible-believing church. And I kept talking to Christians all of a sudden who were kind of reflecting back to me these ideas. They were using the redefinition of the words. They were using the language. And I was aware that many of them weren't aware. They were just picking it up. And they had good intentions. But I was very alarmed because right now, again, this is a dangerous worldview. A bulwark against it are Bible-believing Christians, but they've got to really stand hard on the truth. And I want to talk about that with you in another episode. What do we do? How do we practically kind of deal with this?
Okay.
But I wrote it for Bible-believing Christians to say, here's the counterfeit, here's the truth. Make sure you stay with the truth, reject the counterfeit. And I'm very concerned about that because of the inroads that it's making right now into the church. So, and I give some kind of game plan as well. Like, here's some things you can do to stand firm for the truth and the biblical worldview in the face of this threat. So,
awesome. Well, that is a resource coming out. Another tool for your toolkit. September 15th. Is that correct, Scott?
Correct. September 15th.
September 15th. If you want to access a tool today, we have a free online biblical worldview course to learn biblical worldview, how to apply it, understand counterfeit worldviews. That's at quorumdeo.com. We'll get a link in the comments right here. Please check that out. It's free to you. Sign up, take it at your own pace, or do it with a group. We really appreciate you. Also, if you go to disciplenations.org, if you'd like to support the work of our ministry, creating tools like this, helping equip Christians around the world, there is a donate button at the top. We'd appreciate your support in that as well. Scott, I will have you back on here. I say I will. You're my boss. You'll tell me who I'll have on here. So you'll have
no, you tell me.
You have you back on here sometime really close to the book release. I don't know if we're going to be right before, right at, but it's going to be right there. So mid-September, look for that. We'll pick this theme back up. Next week, we have a very special guest on who's done some great work on 3 different continents, I believe. So please tune in for that. And let's pray out, Scott. So I'll pray for you. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for your blessings. Thank you for Scott's heart in this matter. God, I see him wrestling with this daily, and I know he does not take it lightly. He's not flippant about any of this, Lord, and I just thank you for the wisdom you've given him. I pray for an abundance of that on him, Lord. Discernment, wisdom, humility, love, God, all as he just seeks this truth and seeks to share it with the church, God. And I pray for your body here on earth, Lord, that we would have scales fall from our eyes, that we would understand your truth, Lord, that we would seek it humbly, and God, that we would, as we navigate this, as we encounter divisive ideas, God, that we would be a witness of unity, God, that people would see us, see something different, Lord, and that you would be glorified through that. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right.
Thanks,
well,
Jeff.
thank you so much. We will see you back here next week. Have a great one. God bless.